How's it going, everyone? It's Blake from ChessPathways.com, and today we're doing another game analysis video. This game was sent to me by a Chess.com user with the username Deranged, who had the black pieces here, and I believe this was a game actually played in a tournament. I think he said the time control was a game in 90 minutes with a 30-second increment or something, so a much longer time control game than a lot of these games that I've been analyzing, so that's great. And he said he was facing a much higher rated player here who had the white pieces, and he almost pulled off a draw, but just quite didn't manage. I'm not quite sure exactly what his rating is. I know his Chess.com Blitz rating is in the 1800s or something, but I couldn't tell you exactly what the ratings of these players are. Anyway, let's go ahead and get to the game here. So Deranged had the black pieces, and he opened with the Najdorf Sicilian, which he says is one of his favorite openings to play. And here White chose this line with h3, which has become popular in recent years. I know some top players have been playing this line, but I don't think either player really knew the theory here. Usually h3 is connected with an early g4 idea from White, really trying to accelerate this kingside pawn storm that's typical in the Najdorf. And White might even castle short in some of these lines instead of castling long, and the bishop can come to g2 very fast and put pressure on this diagonal if black plays b5. Those are some of the ideas of this h3 variation. It's not just, a beginner move to try to take away g4 because you're afraid of some one-move attack on your queen or something like that. Black played b5 here. I checked the database. This isn't the most popular move here, though it's probably fine. Usually black plays something like e6 or e5. I'm not sure why b5 isn't as popular. Maybe it's just too committal too early and there's going to be pressure down the diagonal. And also, you sometimes in the Sicilian have to worry about White playing a4 if you play b5 too early and just trying to really open the position and exploit White's lead in development. Anyway, none of that really happened in the game. White played a3 here. Bishop e7 and f3, and already we kind of get this weird hybrid of different Sicilian ideas. This position's almost never been played before, from anything I could find as early as move 8. So we're already kind of in an original position here. Usually f3, of course, is associated with like an English attack with g4, g5, and h4, but White's already played this move h3, so it seems like White's kind of mixing up ideas here. Anyway, knight to c6, and Deranged mentions that he wants to prevent this knight from coming to f5, if black plays e5 here. So he was saying that if he plays e5 here, he's worried about knight f5, so he wanted to kind of trade that knight away. Yeah, I guess the knight is a little annoying here on f5, but it's not really an outpost. We can always kick it away with g6. In fact, we could probably play g6 right away, and I'm guessing black's doing okay here. Something like knight e3, and now knight c6, and our knight can come to d4. I think black's doing fine in this position. So I don't think we have to worry about this knight coming to f5, because we can always kick it away. And I know in a lot of Sicilian lines, black brings this knight to d7, but there's probably nothing wrong with knight c6 either. Bishop e3, black goes ahead and exchanges on d4, and now plays pawn to e5. And I think black's doing fine here. I think black's equalized out of the opening. This is a common pawn structure in the Sicilian, with this backwards d-pawn on the semi-open file for White. And this pawn can be a weakness. We have to be careful that White doesn't get to just pile up on the d-file, stop this pawn from ever moving forward. In some lines, White brings the bishop to g5 and exchanges off this knight to weaken the d5 square even more and prevent us from breaking with pawns at e5. But in this position, that's just not going to be a concern. After White retreats that bishop, we're able to play d5 right away. And this pawn majority that black gets in the Sicilian, the two pawns against one in the center, black was able to avoid the backwards pawn, and now black has more central control. E takes d5, knight takes d5, and yeah, I think black's doing completely fine here. Black's going to have no trouble developing their pieces. White kind of floundered in the opening, playing some mixed up ideas, didn't really achieve anything, and black's fine. I think black's position is even slightly preferable here, in my opinion. Knight takes d5, queen takes d5, White plays bishop d3, black goes ahead and develops their bishop, both players castle, and White plays queen to e2. And now black made an interesting comment here, and this is a very important lesson to learn. So in this position, black exchanged on f2, which is probably fine, and now black played queen to d4, saying that, and black made a comment here saying that their goal was just to trade off all the pieces as possible and to try to draw the rook in game. Now, this is a very important lesson to learn. When you're playing a higher rated player, it might be true that you're happy with the draw, but you never want to be in the mindset of making small concessions, hoping to draw some worse endgame, and playing directly for a draw. That's what one of my old coaches called it, playing directly for a draw. The best way to draw the game is to play the best moves possible to get some slight advantage in the endgame. And, when you have a slight advantage in the endgame, now it's a lot easier to draw the game. Your opponent has to find some accurate moves, And, if they play well, the game will be a draw. You don't want to be making concessions, hoping to get to an endgame where you're slightly worse and make a draw from there. The bottom line is you always want to make the best moves. You never want to just play for a draw. And I think it's not too hard to see that queen d4 is a concession, because if white exchanges queens here, now you have an isolated pawn. And that's going to be the only isolated pawn in the position. There's no other pawn in the position we can really call weak. So just for the sake of getting queens off the board, you're willing to just give white the advantage of having a black isolated pawn on the board that they can target. And why are you in a rush to get queens off the board? Your queen is probably better placed than white's queen. It just doesn't make sense from a chess perspective to play a move like queen d4, exchanging your better queen for white's worst placed queen and accepting an isolated pawn just because you're hoping to get to some endgame that you can draw. Higher rated players convert very slight advantages against lower rated players all the time in these endgames. Trust me, it's happened to me plenty of times. No matter how slight you think that advantage is, you don't want to give them that edge. They already have an edge with their higher rating. You don't want to give them a concession like this. So if you have a slight advantage against a higher rated player, the best way to make that draw is to just keep making the best moves and keep your slight advantage for as long as possible. Hopefully it persists into the endgame. You don't want to give it away just for the sake of simplifying for simplifying's sake. So queen takes d4, e takes d4, rook e1, rook e8, king f2, and bishop to d5. And Deranged said they thought bishop d5 was a mistake because it makes it difficult to defend the d4 pawn. Yeah, maybe. It does make it a little harder. I don't see it being won too eminently, but the fact is it's always going to be difficult to defend the d4 pawn. That's what happens when you have an isolated pawn, especially in an endgame like a rook endgame. This is kind of a dream scenario to be playing against the isolated pawn. White can have the long-term plan of lining up his rooks on the d-file, and eventually if black's defending from the d-file, there could be some c3 move to exploit the pin. It's just going to be annoying in the long term to defend this pawn. Rook a to d1. Now black exchanges rooks. Again, another slight concession, giving the open file to white, although white took the king. I guess white really just wants to keep the pressure on this pawn, which makes sense. Now black said they kind of gave up defending this pawn. They said it was going to be inevitable, they were going to lose it, and they played g6 here. And they give some line here of why rook d8 doesn't work. It looks like there's a problem with this line, though, because they say they're afraid after rook d8 that white's going to play c3, and now black gets to exchange these pawns, and you're saying now bishop c4 does not work because of bishop takes h7. That's true, but why do you have to play bishop c4? It looks like in this line, we can just go ahead and give check, get out of the pin, and then save our bishop. And I think black's just fine here. It's just equal material. And in fact, white's pawns are weaker than black's now. So I don't think that's the problem. But if we play rook d8, it looks like white still has some ways to try to exploit this. White is still definitely better here, but it doesn't look like they can immediately just win this d4 pawn. Maybe some plan involving rook a1 and then a4. This is what a computer wants to do. This seems to make sense, just trying to make more inroads into the position. A4 is going to, undermine these pawns fixed on light squares. So white is definitely clearly better here. They can start trying to stretch black's defenses between the d4 pawn and, making progress on the queen side, opening this bishop up more. But it's by no means just, game over, you're going to lose this pawn. So I think it was worth a try to defend it. So you played g6. Now bishop e2. And now, yeah, it looks like there really is no way to defend your pawn now. Rook e8. And you go ahead and lose the pawn. Bishop c4, rook d2. Okay, and you're saying you just hope you can survive and draw this rook endgame that occurs. Before we go too much further, though, let's go ahead and go back to the position after you made that move that exchanged queens. So queen e2, take. So if queen d4 is bad, I think it's worth talking about what else black can maybe do here to kind of keep their advantage or at least keep the balance. So go ahead and pause the video if you want to think about what plan black should implement here. Go ahead and do that now. Okay, if you're back with me. So the main imbalance in this position, from my perspective, is that white has a pawn majority on the queen side, and black has this 4-on-3 pawn majority on the king side. So I think the best plan here for black is to get that pawn majority rolling and to play f5 here, possibly trying to play e4 later and start opening things up. And it also helps that there's some weaknesses around the white king here. I know this is slightly exposing the black king, and probably Deranged wouldn't even consider this, because this looks really imbalancing. Now the black king is going to be exposed too, and Deranged sounded like they were really playing for a draw. But like I said, one of the best ways to get that draw is to just keep putting pressure on your opponent, keep advancing your own agenda and playing the best moves. If you play too directly for a draw, you're really letting your opponent dictate the course of the game. So I think playing f5, possibly bring this rook to the e file, and playing e4, trying to break through, and just really advancing your own ideas here was probably the best way to go for black. Okay, we can go ahead and go back to the position now. After h5, h4, king g7, king f2, and black really wants to go for this rook in game and try to make a draw. So yeah, a lot of rook in games are draws when you're down a pawn. But it's by no means easy, especially when your opponent is higher rated, they have more experience in these positions as you. I've converted tons of rook in games against lower rated players when I was up a pawn. So rook c8, yeah, Deranged correctly says he can't afford to trade rooks. That's kind of the #1 rule of defending rook in games when you're down a pawn. You don't want to trade rooks and go to the king and pawn in game, because that's almost always a win for the player with the extra pawn. Unless there's only one pawn left on the board, in which case there's, you have to know all your in-game theory there. I have a beginner series on that if you're curious. But when there's many pawns left on the board, usually the extra pawn wins in a king and pawn in game. Alright, so let's see how this goes. Usually these kind of endgames develop kind of slowly. Okay, white offers that exchange of rook. Black gives check. Black's advancing the king, g3. Black's just shuffling around. And black exchanges there on a4. This gives white a passed pawn already, though. And it gives white another target to target on a6. So it looks like white's already making progress. Yeah, to me, this doesn't look like an easy draw at all. I think white has a big advantage here. There's a weak pawn they can target. They have a passed pawn. They're going to slowly probably advance. Black can get counterplay maybe by bringing the rook down here, but it's not going to be easy. Rook to b6, b4, king e5, check, f5, okay. Yeah, this does not look good for black. And really, I think the rook has to be trying to get counterplay against these pawns. I don't think we can really tie up our rook like this. That's another, big rule of rook in games. Your rook has to be active. I'm wondering if we go back a few moves, because our rook was on the e-file. I'm wondering if we could leave our rook on the e-file, and if white ever tries to advance their king in too far, maybe we can come in and start trying to scoop up some of the black pawns. That would probably be my idea here. And maybe that gives some hope. But I think if white's careful, they can try to organize this not working. Like, for example, they could put their rook back on a3 to kind of guard these pawns laterally, and then advance these pawns out of the way, and the king's coming up. This pawn is still kind of, being eyed by the rook from a3. Yeah, it's really not going to be easy to draw this, if it's even possible against best play. But the passive rook on b6, I think, is even worse, because now white's just kind of free to advance. White gives some checks, c5, they're really driving us back now. Yeah, the rook on f6 is really passive. a5, this gives white connected passed pawns. I really don't think we can do this. Yeah, and I know you're hoping they'll kind of take your free pawn here, and this pawn will be a weakness, because you can probably come and scoop it up. But remember, you always want to, I talked about this in an earlier game analysis video, whenever you create pawn tension, your opponent has 3 options. They can leave the tension, they can take the pawn, or they can push past. And you always want to consider all 3 options. I know you're kind of desperate here, and you're just hoping for anything you can to save this game, though. b5, and with connected passed pawns, I think the game's over. Connected passed pawns in a rook in game, when they're this far advanced, are just extremely strong. Yeah, your passed pawn is not going to be a problem for white to deal with. Yeah, you finally got your rook active, and you finally tried to implement the kind of the last-ditch effort I suggested, coming back with your rook and attacking the white pawns. But now it's just too late with the connected passed pawns. There's no way to save this. Yeah, these pawns are extremely strong, and you resigned here, obviously, because you're getting mated or white's promoting. I think you're just actually getting mated no matter what. Yeah, there's no way to really break this barrier white has, and white's coming down. Okay, very good game there. I feel like you outplayed white in the opening, and really the whole turning point was you wanted to play directly for this draw, and you were content to make concessions to white to try to play directly for this rook in game, where you hoped you could draw, but it turned out to not be so easy. There were some improvements you could have made there in the endgame. You probably could have more tenaciously tried to hang on to this d4 pawn and the pawn down rook in game. If you would have kept your rook a little more active, kind of, a very important rook in game principle, keep your rook a little more active and try to swing down here at the right moment, maybe you have a chance. But I hope this proved to you that you can't just make concessions to higher rated players to play directly for these endgames and think, maybe I can hold on, because it's really not that simple. Your opponent already has the advantage of being higher rated, having more experience, and if you add some concessions onto that, they're going to convert the game the vast majority of the time, I would say. I've lost lots of games to international masters and grandmasters doing this kind of thing, so I've learned that lesson the hard way. And now it appears you have too. So very important takeaway there. Don't play directly for the draw. Just play the best moves. All right. Thank you very much for watching. Please go ahead and sign up for chesspathways.com. It's completely free to join. If you want your game analyzed, that's the best way to get in contact with me. We're giving away a free move-by-move guide to chess thinking, exclusive contests, exclusive content. So please go to chesspathways.com and sign up for that email list so you never miss an update. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you again soon.